Yeah, the pressure's on now, ladies of the Library of Congress. You're up next, and it's a triple act, more than a double act, about describing web archives and interlinked approach to access and outreach. And I can't remember which one of you is brave enough to sort of speak first or drive the slides. So be happy if I just shut up now and one of you appears and tells me who's going to take over.
So I
Yes.
will take over speaking first, and Carly will drive the slides.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Carly.
Thank you. So as Michael said, we're from the Library of Congress Web Archiving section. I'm Lauren Baker, a Senior Digital Collections Specialist in this section.
Hello, I'm Carly Borgter, and I am a digital collection specialist.
And I'm Tracy Halfegate, and I am also a digital collection specialist.
So to give you some background, the Library of Congress has been archiving websites since 2000. We began with a small pilot project to archive the United States presidential election. Since then, the collections have grown considerably across a variety of events and themes. We've been ensuring long-term access to selected content published on the web for more than 25 years. The web archiving section, where we work, is the technical team that facilitates the web archiving program. We have 9 full-time staff who manage, preserve, and provide access to archived web content selected by subject experts from across the library. On screen, you can see thumbnails and brief summaries of the 110 web archive collections that have been described and made available on the library's website. Today, we'll share how we brought together 2 existing workflows to improve access and discoverability of web archive collections. The first workflow centers on how we assemble and publish collection-level descriptions, which we call Framework. The second workflow describes the process for sharing about web archive collections on our blog. While these separate workflows were in place for many years, we began posting collection leader interviews in tandem with new framework launches starting about a year and a half ago. This came about when we shifted some responsibilities for these processes among staff within our team, and we put focused effort on increasing outreach about web archives. Pictured on the slide is an example of how these efforts have come to fruition. On the left is the collection framework for the Industry Association's Web Archive, which launched at this time last year, and on the right is the corresponding blog post published in April 2025. So we can go on and start with the first workflow for the framework process. Collection frameworks are pages on the library's website that act as entry points for each of the library's digital collections, including web archive collections. Collections with framework appear on gallery pages like the one pictured on the slide in the image on the left. The image on the right is what the framework looks like for one of our newer collections, the Geospatial Software and File Formats Documentation Web Archive. Framework provides users with a narrative about the collection, featured collection items, links to expert resources, and a rights statement, which is standard across all web archive collections. To assemble and publish frameworks, the web archiving section works with the subject matter experts who lead the collections and our IT department who make the collections and items available on the library's website. This slide summarizes the different departments' roles, which we'll share about in more detail throughout the presentation. The framework process has evolved over time. A 2019 project set the stage for our current workflow. In a 6-month period, we added a backlog of more than 30 collection descriptions to the library's website, nearly doubling the number previously available. Since we were taking on such a large number of frameworks at one time, we used our internal staff forum, the Web Archiving Interest Group, to pitch the project, and we followed up by emailing collection leaders and supervisors to earn their support. Previous iterations of the workflow involved emailing Word documents among staff members. With so many collection descriptions to put together in such a short time, and with collaborators from the curatorial divisions and IT, we needed a solution that would allow for shared creation and editing and would be easily reproducible. We landed on using Confluence, which hosts our staff wiki, to create a new framework template and accompanying documentation. The template is a fillable form with instructions about how to complete each field. The first part of the template includes project tracking information like status and expected release date that syncs up with reporting about other digital collections, so it fits neatly into our existing workflows. Another way that we made the work reproducible and increased consistency across collections was by writing boilerplate text to establish standard language for certain fields. The example on screen shows how we standardized the text to describe the collection period and acquisitions information for ongoing collections. So we've talked about what framework is, the roles of different departments in creating it, and some of the ways that we have standardized the process over the years. This slide shows a high-level workflow of our current assembly and publication process. We have a blanket one-year embargo across all Web Archive items, so once a majority of records in a collection have exited the embargo, framework assembly can begin. Either staff from our section or the collection leader may initiate the process. We also have an annual collection review period when we ask collection leaders if they are ready to begin framework. This starts the process for many collections and helps us to plan much of the schedule for the year ahead. Next, we need to set up the templates. Our section has a script that uses MySQL to query our collections database. We use that report to create a collection framework page and populate portions before sending to the collection leader. The collection leader completes the template and returns it back to us. We then create thumbnail images for the featured items and add the framework to our website test environment. Once the collection leader approves the framework, we work with IT to transition it from the website's test environment to production, making the published framework available online for anyone to access. I'll pass it over to Carly next to share about our communication strategies and project management when it comes to creating framework.
Thanks, Lauren. So when I joined the web archiving section in January of 2023, I took over much of the framework workflow from Lauren. And throughout this leadership transition, we worked together to standardize our communication when sending framework templates to collection leaders. These copy and paste email templates you see on screen make sending frameworks a breeze. After the framework template gets set up in our Confluence space, I simply need to update the items in red and send the email. From there, collection leaders have everything they need, their template, instructions for completing it, and their due date. Speaking of due dates, I love due dates and I love to follow up prior to a due date. Once we establish a framework due date, I create calendar invites for myself to follow up 2 weeks and then again 1 week before that date. I even send one last Hail Mary if the collection leader misses the deadline. I have found that follow-up emails and even emails letting staff know, of course, nicely, that they missed a deadline oftentimes leads to a completed framework down the line. These follow-up templates also eliminate the social nuances and potential stressors of following up. I don't need to tiptoe around striking a balance between reminding a collection leader that they have a deadline approaching, while also communicating that I understand they balance many priorities. I have already thought through those communications with my templates, and I can always edit and personalize as I need. Simply having a follow-up template is much less daunting than having an empty email with only the to and subject fields filled out. Another helpful tidbit that allows the framework process to run smoothly is by making smaller asks or even reframing our ask. In our 2-week reminder email, we edit our template to clarify the 3 most important deliverables we are looking for in the completed framework template, highlighted in yellow on this slide. We mention a collection summary and give them a helpful resource to reference while completing this, the option of choosing up to 10 featured items, and of those 10, choosing one single representative featured thumbnail. Now, when you put it that way, that doesn't sound like such a big lift, does it? Breaking down the ask over the course of a few emails is helpful for moving the project along. Like I said before, I normally do get some sort of response to my follow-up emails, and I think reframing the ask is instrumental to that. Additionally, collaborating on new framework launches is one of the many opportunities for us to engage with staff about web archives and its challenges, like replay and access. For example, we are currently undergoing an access platform migration, which has caused some confusion amongst staff. We broadly communicate these challenges, but oftentimes framework is when staff discover the complexities firsthand for their own collections. So when I'm helping collection leaders fill out their framework template, it can also become a mini one-on-one training session where I can walk them through how to access desired content. I like to think it's extra satisfying when their frameworks are completed because they'd learned new web archiving skills. To wrap up the framework launch process, completed framework templates are always due on the 15th of the month. This date is intentionally set to be consistent with our item record release and the extract, transfer, load, or ETL processes that enable collection facets to appear on the library's website. So as you can see, after their due date on the 15th, I always have about 1.5 to 2 weeks to go through edits with collection leaders, get their templates set up in our test environment that Lauren mentioned earlier, and collaborate with our IT colleagues before the item records are released on lock.gov on the 4th Saturday of the month. Using a rolling due date of the 15th of the month also makes it easy for me to establish a new due date with a collection leader if they missed the initial one, but are still interested in prioritizing a collection framework down the line. Finally, our team uses shared calendars like the one on the screen, a recurring communications team meeting, and other Confluence tracking mechanisms to add transparency to the framework workflow. Anyone on our team can see the status of a framework ready to be sent to a collection leader, in progress with a collection leader, or successfully published. This transparency becomes really important as I start to loop Tracy into communications after collection leaders have completed the framework template. And now I'm going to pass it over to Tracy so she can tell you how we created and fine-tuned the process of linking new frameworks to interview blog posts.
Thank you, Carly. About 1.5 years ago, while updating the framework template, Lauren invited feedback from the team. I suggested adding an outreach component, specifically a question asking collection leaders whether they would be interested in being interviewed about their collection for The Signal, which is the library's blog about digital collection work. We had been wanting to do more to promote new collections on the blog, but we were limited in what we could do without the involvement of collection leaders. Although the web archiving section supports the creation and management of all web archive collections, we do not propose new collections, make curatorial decisions, or have subject expertise in the areas they document. Interviewing collection leaders would enable us to tell a fuller, more informed story about each collection, and integrating that workflow into the framework process made sense, because it was a time when they'd already be thinking and writing about their collections. We began with a simple yes or no question about participating in a short interview, along with a link to preview the questions at the bottom of the framework template. We later added a second question asking if they plan to promote the collection through other channels so we could be aware of those efforts and share them more widely through our mailing list and listservs. If a collection leader expresses interest in an interview, Carly copies me on her response and lets them know I will follow up once the framework is complete. These handoffs help ensure the process moves forward smoothly. To create a list of questions, I drew inspiration from similar interviews published years ago and workshopped different options with my colleagues. The questions we chose are on this slide. The questions invite collection leaders to describe the collection and their role in creating it, explain how they selected materials for archiving, reflect on the challenges they encountered, highlight notable content, and consider the collection's significance and potential future uses. Our goal is to increase visibility not only for the collections themselves, but also of the behind-the-scenes work involved in building a web archive. I chose to do the interviews in writing after seeing that format work well for other Signal interviews. My experience with oral interviews also taught me how time-consuming it can be to transcribe and edit spoken responses into publishable prose. For the first interview, I sent the questions along with a proposed draft deadline and publication date to the collection leader. I also asked for images to accompany the post and links to related resources. Unfortunately, that initial attempt wasn't as successful as I hoped, so it prompted me to rethink my approach. In the next slides, I will walk through the adjustments I made after receiving feedback from my colleagues and brainstorming ways to improve the process. One change I introduced was asking collection leaders whether they would like to make it a joint interview. This idea emerged while working on a collection with 2 co-leaders, and I've since expanded my definition of an interviewee so that a collection leader can choose to do the interview with any staff member who has made a significant impact on the collection. Several have chosen to do the joint interview option, which underscores the collaborative nature of web archiving and enriches the blog post by incorporating multiple perspectives. It may also make participating in the blog post feel more manageable and less intimidating. For a similar reason, I stopped asking collection leaders to add images and links to the blog post. My colleagues pointed out that this was an added burden on the collection leader and that I could do that myself. So now I add the links and images later in the process and ask the collection leader to review them and provide feedback if they want to add or change anything. This removed a potential roadblock and helped the process move forward more efficiently. I also began offering collection leaders the option of conducting the interview over a video call if they preferred that to a written exchange. This grew out of feedback suggesting that different personalities might gravitate towards different formats, as well as some uncertainty about whether a written interview could feel as engaging as a live conversation. So far, however, everyone I've contacted has chosen the written format. That reinforced my desire to keep written interviews as the default option, and I began thinking about how I might make those interviews as compelling and substantive as possible. Instead of just sending collection leaders a bullet-pointed list of questions, I began building a template in Confluence that added additional context and guidance for the interview. At the top of the template, shown here on the slide, is a brief statement outlining the intended audience and purpose of the interview, which is something I realized I needed to clarify. The template also provides links to sample interviews along with designated spaces for the draft deadline and proposed publication date. In the latter half of the template, the layout shifts to a two-column format. The questions and space for responses appear on the left, with tips and suggestions for how to answer each question on the right. The first three questions are shown here. The guidance is meant to clarify expectations, encourage deeper reflection, and recommend ways interviewees can utilize work they already completed for the framework or other aspects of the web archiving process. For example, when asking interviewees to describe the collection, I note that they can borrow from the framework collection description, but recommend they adapt the language to suit the more informal conversational tone of a blog post. For the question about selecting material to archive, I suggest revisiting the goals or priorities outlined in their collection plan and include additional questions to encourage fuller discussion of the curation process, such as, what resources did they consult? How did they define the scope? What criteria makes a website a good addition to the collection? When asking about highlights, I encourage specificity and an explanation of why that content is valuable or distinctive. If they have trouble identifying websites to highlight, I suggest looking at the featured items on the framework page and explaining why those sites were chosen to represent the collection. Since implementing the new template, I've received detailed, thoughtful responses which suggest that the added guidance and examples are helpful to interviewees. The interviews go through several rounds of review, which is roughly outlined on this slide. First, I review their answers and provide feedback on the Confluence template. This first stage allows me to address some of the limitations of the written format by asking follow-up questions. I also may make suggestions about how things are worded or structured. After the collection leader has had the opportunity to respond to my feedback, which may involve some back and forth in multiple drafts, the interview is then transferred to Microsoft Word, where it is proofread by another member of the web archiving section. It is then formatted in WordPress, where a member of the Signal editorial board conducts a final review, providing feedback and checking details such as campaign codes and links, alt images for text, and other publication requirements. To simplify things, I consolidate and communicate all feedback to the collection leader so there is a single point of contact and no conflicting instructions. I found that some collection leaders prefer to make their own edits in response to feedback, while others are more pressed for time and ready to move on. I try to adjust accordingly, sometimes taking a more active role in revising the draft to keep things moving, while ensuring that the collection leader always has final approval before publication. The interviews had a slow start, but we published the first in April 2025 and have since released 8 in total, including one that was just published this morning about preserving U.S. Indigenous government websites. By integrating interviews into the framework workflow, we've established a steady stream of new content for the Signal. Conducting these interviews has deepened my understanding of and appreciation for the collections. Before interviewing the collection leaders for the geospatial software and file format documentation web archive, for example, I assumed it would be difficult to make the topic engaging for a general audience. I was completely wrong. The conversation revealed fascinating insights into the history of digital mapmaking and ultimately became one of my favorite interviews. It also reinforced that collection leaders are the best advocates for their collections. They bring subject expertise, enthusiasm, and the ability to clearly articulate why the collection is interesting and important. We've also received positive feedback. In one notable instance, following the interview about the Maldives government web archive, the director of the National Archives of Maldives reached out to the collection leader and I to express his appreciation for the valuable contribution to digital preservation and interest in exploring possible areas for collaboration and knowledge exchange. The success of these interviews led us to adopt a similar format and workflow for featuring older collections as well. Rather than limiting interviews to newly released collections, we now consider them for collections that have undergone significant upgrades or reach key milestones, like the Science Blog's web archive, which was recently updated and expanded after 12 years of collecting. The interviews add meaningful context to each collection, so Carly adds them to the export resource section of the framework after they've been completed. This allows researchers to find the interview on the collection page, and it creates a satisfying full circle moment in the workflow. The framework leads to the interview, and the interview enriches the framework. What started as a simple yes or no question has evolved into a scalable model for outreach. By embedding interviews within an established workflow, supported by templates, clear handoffs, and defined review stages, the process is both reproducible and sustainable. Outreach is no longer a peripheral or incidental task. It is built into the lifecycle of each collection. We'd like to close with a few takeaways that may be applicable beyond this specific workflow. The first and overarching lesson is to integrate outreach into existing workflows. Think about when and where it might make sense to make it a recognized part of your work. Additional takeaways include use reproducible templates. Both the framework and the interview process rely on templates that create consistency and make the work easier to scale. Communicate clearly and establish deadlines. This is especially important when collaborating with colleagues outside your immediate team. Make smaller asks. Many of our collaborators are balancing competing priorities, so we're intentional about limiting the burden we place on them and step in when we can streamline the process. And finally, ask colleagues for feedback. Even colleagues who are not directly involved in a workflow can offer valuable perspectives. The interviews began because Lauren asked for feedback on the framework process, and they only became successful after I incorporated suggestions from others. Thank you for joining us today. If you would like to explore our web archives or read the collection interviews, we've provided links on the slide and in the chat. You can also contact us at webcapture@loc.gov.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you for keeping the time and finishing bang on time. That's brilliant. And again, the virtual applause is there before I've even asked for it. Thank you very much. Well, you guys have been busy posting sort of supplemental links in the chat, and that's great. Has anybody got any particular questions they'd like to put to any three of you, or does one of you want to moderate the questions?
Moderate if and when they come in as well.
Okay. Well, I'll kick things off perhaps whilst people are thinking. So I think it was Lauren said that the collections have a blanket 1 year embargo. What's the thinking behind that? Why did you pick 1 year and not sort of 6 months or 3 years, or is it tied to your workflow, or is it just that's the time you find things settle down, or what?
It's a combination of reasons. So that's guidance that came from our Office of General Counsel. And I think their thinking behind that is to not interfere with the live web. We don't want any, question of, is this a live website or is this a web archive?
Okay.
So that offers a little bit of space there. And then also it takes us time to assemble the item records, the collections. So we have that built-in time with that embargo period.
Okay. Thank you. And I maybe, well, not related because you've clarified why you wait for a year. And this is one for, I think, well, Tracy or possibly all of you. So are all the sort of everything that goes on in Confluence, the draft interviews and the questions and stuff, is all that kept as well and kept somewhere in the Library of Congress's archives for people who want to go back and sort of say, what was the discussion about this collection? How did it get there? How did the thinking around it change, or the way it was described change? Or is that sort of like, no, what we make public is what we make public, and those records are sort of essentially disposed of when they're no longer needed?
Yeah, so we don't make the draft of the interview public. Only the final version of it is what gets published. But I think the other part of your question is maybe more of like a record keeping question. And Lauren, would you like to talk maybe about like record keeping at the Library of Congress?
Sure, I can address that question. So I'll say two things. One, so we do some like in-house crawls of our own content. And so that includes things like our staff sites. So that is saved in that way. And then in terms of record management, the things that we put on Confluence, fall under our regular records keeping for the library. So there's, specific rules about different series. So we just sort of fall into those usual workflows. But like in terms of immediate needs, all of the previous discussions about putting up framework are still available now. So, Tracy mentioned one of our collections where we went back and updated it 12 years on, and so we can look back at what was done previously, and staff have that for reference.
A nice segue. We have a question in the chat from Christopher. Is the goal to have a blog post for every collection, or are there many collections that are released without going through the interview blog process?
That's a great question. So we started this process about a year and a half ago. Obviously there are going to be older collections that don't have interviews. We do ask everyone who is going through the framework process if they would like to do an interview, and most of them have said yes. So that's really exciting. It would be really great if going forward, as many of the new collections as possible have interviews. But again, it's a question that we ask the collection leaders, and it's up to them whether they think that maybe an interview is the best way to introduce the collection, or maybe they're planning a blog post for their own blog. And that's also okay. Like if somebody says, I'd rather not do an interview, I have this other idea for a blog post instead, that's fantastic. We'll share that as widely as we can on our mailing list.
And I guess it's sort of related. So there's no plans to sort of go back retrospectively and do these interviews for collections that have been up for a while, or does that very much depend on the collection leader? Or I guess if people are still around, or what?
Yeah, we are going back and doing some for older collections. An example that I talked about in the presentation was the Science Blog Web Archive, which is 12 years old, but they had recently undergone an upgrade to their framework and updating things for their framework, as well as expanding the collection itself. And because that was a period where they were really reflecting on what was in the collection and how they wanted to grow and expand it, I thought that would be a really great time to do an interview. And so far, that's the first one that we've done that's been for an older collection. But it is something that we would like to do more in the future. For example, I know one that's coming down the line is a collection leader was working on enhancing the records by adding more descriptive metadata, and something like that is kind of an upgrade that we would like to highlight, maybe by having a blog post about it.
Okay, and have you had much feedback yet then, if it's not been running for so long? I mean, is the sense that the collections that have these descriptions and interviews and stuff around them are more popular, or more, the uptake is greater, the interest that they generate is greater, or is it too early to say?
We've definitely gotten some really great feedback. I mentioned how the National Director of the Maldives reached out to us after we had done the Maldives Government Web Archive, which was really cool. We've also had a student reach out to us about one of the blog posts, saying that they thought that the collection was really cool, and they were wondering if there was a way they could volunteer, and that's, of course, is really exciting. And yeah, I've just heard from different people that they just find them to be really interesting and engaging, and it's always wonderful to hear that.
It's good that you weren't offered an expenses paid trip to the Maldives then. That's the downside, isn't it? You're a government official. Yeah. You can't take it, can you? Sorry. Well,
yeah, I wish.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Really different take on the whole process, and I think as has been said in the comments, stressing that the role that outreach can play in facilitating workflows and sort of promoting what we do. But if it's all right with everyone, I mean, keep posting in the chat if you've got any questions that occur to you for the folk at the Library of Congress. But I'm going to suggest now we move on to our final